Hello, Pranam Da. Thank you to everyone that's joining us today. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes before we get started and just let everyone join the room. We've got a few people coming in now. We've got about 70 people signed up to join us today. We look like we've got quite a few people still coming in, but we'll get started. So, Pnawn da, diolch am ymuno I ni heddiw. Well, hello, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be doing a show and tell on our AI and automation project, sharing some of those early findings. I will hand you over to James Alderman in a second, who will be introducing some of the team. Just to note that before we get started, we're recording today's session. Everybody will be on mute and your cameras will be off automatically, but we will be recording this and putting it on our YouTube channel afterwards. The show and tell itself is going to be going on for 30 minutes, but there's going to be a bit of time at the end where James and Matt and Adam will all be staying on to answer any questions anybody would have. So if you'd like to stay on and ask them anything, you're more than welcome. And pop any questions as well in the chat as we go, if you're thinking of them as we go along, and do our best to answer those for you. So I'll pass you over to James now. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise. Yeah, that was great. Thanks. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a short show and tell to explain some of the early findings from our discovery into how AI and automation is being used across the Welsh public sector. I'm James Alderman, the delivery manager on this piece of work, and virtually alongside me today I have Matthew Evans, a program manager from the WLGA, and also from CDPS, we have Adam Hardy, the user researcher who completed the interviews and the research. As Elise says, the show and tell should run for roughly 30 minutes, but we've held a further 30 minutes after that for questions because we have quite a lot of findings to be able to get through. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So CDPS are here to help make digital public services across Wales better for those that use them and better for those that look after them. We think AI and automation could help make services better, but we needed to validate this assumption by talking to the people already using them. We needed to understand how people are using the technology, what's going well and what's not going so well, and what further help we could give. Next slide, please. We completed 11 interviews, all lasting between 60 and 90 minutes, 7 local authorities, 3 arm's length bodies, and 1 housing authority. With such an amazing response, we rapidly filled all the available slots that we had during our 5-week interview window, which meant that from a health perspective, we had to cover that in 1 conversation with Public Health Wales and some secondary research through Welsh Government contacts. We did also have what we've classed as 4 conversations with the Alan Turing Institute, Public Health Wales, and 2 other suppliers. We've classed those separately as conversations because they weren't full interviews. Next slide, please. So due to the huge response of people who wanted to talk to us, we then also opened up a survey. And that survey was available via our website. And from the survey, we had 9 responses. 4 of those were local authorities, 3 were arm's length bodies, and 2 were colleges/educations. So add all that up, overall, we've had direct input from 20 different Welsh public sector organisations into this research. Next slide, and I'll pass over to Adam.
Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I wanted to start by giving you an overview of where the organizations are that we spoke to in terms of making use of RPA and making use of AI. And we wanted to plot that on one graph so you get a sort of an overall picture. Now, whilst we were conducting the research, a sort of simpler scale emerged from the things that we heard. So it's a scale based around whether or not organizations are sort of making strategic use of these technologies. And by strategic, I mean there's a sort of a centrally coordinated plan for how they're going to be used, whether that's in place or not. We also were looking at to what extent they've got live instances relying on these technologies. So things that are actually doing real processes versus ones that are just playing within the background to understand how well they work. And finally, we sort of looked at how confident or how established and repeatable people are in terms of having developed processes for running these types of implementations. And so we called that from 0 to 3. We've got people who are limited in their use of these technologies. That means there's no centrally coordinated use of them at the moment, although they may be using them in pockets around the organization. Then level 1 is people are exploring how to use these technologies, but they've got no instances live at the moment that are relying on the technology concerned. Number 2 is where they're experimenting. So they're playing around with these tools for real. They've got some live processes that are powered by either RPA or AI, for example, and they also plan to expand further in using these technologies. And finally, people who are confident, they've got a really repeatable, solid, tested implementation process in terms of churning these things out. And they've got many live instances that are powered by the technologies and indeed plan to continue into the future. So if you look at this graph, you can see that we've plotted the 20 organizations we spoke to on here. And there are 2 axes. So along the horizontal axis, it's their use of RPA from 0 to 3. And on the vertical axis, there is the use of AI from 0 to 3. What this means is that organizations further to the right on this graph are making heavier use of RPA, and organizations further to the top of this graph are making heavier use of AI. So when we take a step back and look at this, you can see some sort of expected findings, I think. So it's the middle of this graph where this is most heavily populated. So most organizations are either exploring or experimenting how to use both of these technologies, both RPA and AI. We do have some interesting outliers. So you can see in the right-hand column, there are at least 2 organizations we spoke to who are very confident in using RPA. They've got multiple processes live that are powered by bots, a really well-established, repeatable process centered around a center of excellence, and they intend to keep using this technology into the future. And then also interestingly on the left-hand side, there's at least one organization that has a live process powered by AI, but is not using RPA in any sort of real sense at the moment. So next slide, please. So it was important for us to make sure when we conducted this research that we were all on the same page in terms of terminology. So we defined what we meant before we went into it, both in terms of automation and robotic process automation. And these definitions were created with assistance from the Welsh Government. So we spoke to an authority on AI within the Welsh Government, and they helped us to come to these definitions for automation and RPA. And we shared these with the people that we conducted research with to make sure we weren't talking at cross purposes when we asked them questions about their use of RPA. Next slide, please. So to give an overview of where organizations are in terms of RPA at the moment, in terms of those that we spoke to, here's some interesting things that emerged. So through the course of the conversation, it became clear that most, at least conceptually, favor a sort of direct integration through the scripting of application programming interfaces or APIs. In other words, having their systems directly pass data between each other and achieving automation in that way. And this, I think, is because it was considered to be sort of neater and it was sort of more robust, less likely to fall over if things changed. And it was particularly true in those organizations who are blessed with having a modern technical stack to draw upon and a good development resource on hand in order to do that scripting. However, most did value RPA as another option. And this was particularly true when the systems they were working with lacked APIs, for example, or indeed when the development costs themselves were simply going to be higher. And by costs, this can be in time, it can be in money, it can be in terms of resources or capacity available. And so there were lots of situations in which people would choose to use RPA as another option over and above trying to do direct integration. And they were, as you would imagine, applying it to these sort of high volume, low complexity, dull, repetitive tasks where the same thing is done again and again with very little sort of skill involved. Next slide, please. And throughout this, I'm going to draw on a few quotes just to illustrate some of the points we're making. So this is a quote from one of our local authority respondents, and it sort of neatly sums up a few different themes we heard from organisations all in one paragraph. So more than one organisation used the term sticking plaster about RPA, sort of saying that it's sort of a patch that you stick on something that's a bit broken. And along with this, people were worried about the risk of doing that to a process that wasn't very good in itself. So sort of sticking a patch on a bad process rather than trying to fix the process itself. This also talks to the fact that lots of organizations have done a lot of work to support direct system-to-system integration between the digital systems they're using. But it sort of ends on the fact that despite all this, organizations value RPA as another tool in the toolbox, which has clear advantages under certain circumstances. Next slide, please. So we heard about a wide range of different use cases for RPA currently happening in Wales today. And here's just a few examples. So people spoke a lot about doing stuff in HR. And this might say something about the fact that people like to start with internal processes, internally facing services before they start looking at public facing ones themselves. And several organizations mentioned that they did indeed start with HR processes. And that can be everything from processing starters, processing leavers, as in staff joining and leaving, processing timesheets, carrying out DBS checks, or handling contract expiries as and when they arise. And all of these things can be quite labor intensive, and organizations had automated these processes. And in the example here, which was a leaving process, it was 10 colleagues were involved working in 10 systems in order to process one leaver. And as you can see, there'd be huge gains made here by automating that with a robot. Equally, finance is seeing a lot of use. So people are processing things like faster payments, direct debits, or even matching payments received to a customer account and any outstanding debt that customer has, which is the example we've got here. And the local authority that had automated that was processing 32,000 transactions a year through that robot. And also referrals or applications, so referrals into a service or applications to receive a service, we're seeing some automation. And in the example here, it was a referral to a third-party services called Supporting People, where you could refer someone to a third-party service. It used to take 7 days, and that had been reduced to 24 hours by automating it. We can go to the next slide, please. So again, this quote sort of captures some of the stuff I've just told you. It's from another local authority, and it's demonstrating an RPA use case. And it draws out 3 different benefits that we heard about that organizations are getting from RPA. So obviously there's the efficiency. So the process is faster and has a reduced demand on FTEs or full-time employment equivalents. But at the same time, it has this benefit of being able to smooth out peaks and troughs in demand. So this particular service, as you can imagine, is a seasonal one. It kicks in one particular time of year when there's a lot of demand. And this organization has 5 bots that they've trained to carry out all of the automated tasks that they have automated within their organization. And this means that they can shift a larger number of bots onto the services that are experiencing a peak and therefore handle them more readily. And finally, this speaks to the idea that doing so can improve the customer experience, which is obviously highly important. And in this case, the reduction in anxiety by having your application handled on the day itself, rather than having to wait a month to 6 weeks to hear back, cannot be underestimated, really. Next slide, please. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, which is what I'm going to talk about now, this is what we mean. It's obviously quite a broad term, and I think that reflects the fact that this is a very broad area, and we didn't want to get too precise with it at the moment. So this is when we say artificial intelligence, this is what we mean. So if we move to the next slide, please. So again, giving you an overview of what we heard about AI. It's something that all organizations without exception saw it as playing a role in improving services in the future. But however, I think perhaps due to the level of hype around it at the moment and the amount of coverage it's getting in the news, there is a lot of understandable caution. And there's caution about things like the AI being biased, about the transparency, about being clear with customers about where AI is being used, about protecting personal data and GDPR considerations if AI is involved in processing personal information. And of course, the accuracy of output that a generative AI or an AI that produces something new, how accurate that output is. And perhaps as a result of this, most organizations we spoke to are at the moment focusing on getting their governance and their policies and their standards and their guidance in place. So sort of laying the foundation for approaching AI in a really robust way. However, they are also using it for real on actual processes as well. Next slide, please. So this is a quote that we heard from one of the arm's length bodies we spoke to, and it tells you something about some of the stuff that the organizations are trying to achieve through the use of AI, and that's making their services simpler for customers, so easier to find, understand, and use. And as you can see, this organization was talking about introducing a new service that was going to get a much higher volume of customers involved across a much diverser group of customers as well. And they were looking ahead and thinking that an AI-powered chatbot that could help them guide through something that's quite technical and could be possibly quite hard to understand is something they'd definitely be interested in exploring. Next slide, please. And then this captures, I think, what I'd call a sort of a steady, considered approach to adopting AI. So organizations spoke about resisting the pressure to rush something out just so as to be seen to be doing something, but instead laying that groundwork that we've spoken about. Next slide, please. So it was being used today in a wide range of different ways by organizations we spoke to. Most common was something that they talked about being called personal productivity. So that's individuals within an organization who are using something like ChatGPT to do the sort of the content generation, the summarization, or the theming of large bodies of information that we know that it's really good at. And several spoke about the fact they were using it for coding support as well. So their developers were using it to check their code, etc. Cybersecurity was another big area. It is so much, it seems cheaper and more efficient to be using an AI-powered cybersecurity rather than recruiting a very large team to handle that, which is what would be required with the level of sort of attacks that are being experienced at the moment. And then things like analysis of large sets of qualitative data, automatic Welsh translation, and then the use of bots to understand natural language and take action off the back of it, both in a staff-facing context, which is where there's a few examples being used today, but also, and perhaps more longer term, moving to public-facing chatbots. The ones that we heard about that are live today were, by the admission of the organizations who owned them, still quite basic, mostly rule-based, but perhaps with some sort of a basic ability to understand sentiment. But there's an ambition and an appetite to move towards a more fully fledged chatbot that can properly understand natural language in the future. Next slide, please. So this interest in sort of real-time generative AI does pose a bit of a problem for bilingual services. And that's due to the fact that some organizations felt that the quality of automatically translated Welsh at the moment is not at the level that it is for English. And so they were worried that perhaps that was going to be a barrier in the future to adopting these chatbots if the Welsh language automatic translation can't come up to speed in line with the English one. Next slide, please. And there are also some exciting things around sort of Internet of Things type approaches. And there are at least 2 organizations we spoke to who were interested in using sensors and doing AI analysis of the sensor data to do more predictive approaches to things like maintenance. So, for example, in this case, being able to get in and carry out maintenance on a house before damp and mold becomes a health hazard. And both of the organizations who mentioned these things, their providers were also working with academic institutions to explore these applications as well, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. So just to talk about some general findings, both across AI and RPA, what was really heartening to us is that organizations appear to be what we'd call perhaps service-led rather than technology-led. By which I mean they weren't taking a piece of technology and walking around going, right, what can we apply this to? They were saying we would rather identify each problem that we identify on its merits and decide what is the best technological approach for tackling that, be that RPA, be that AI, or anything else. So they're not taking a hammer and going around looking for nails. They are taking a proper sort of looking at the service overall and thinking about what is the right way to solve the problems that might be emerging within those services. Next slide, please. Lots of people spoke about the value of case studies and how important it was to be able to demonstrate in a tangible way the benefits that these technologies can provide, both for bringing the colleagues within the organization along on the journey and getting buy-in for future activity, but also giving other organizations who perhaps haven't taken action yet that it's worth them getting involved as well. Next slide, please. And most felt that further guidance and standards would also be beneficial, and used the example of staff who were starting to adopt the use of ChatGPT and then being worried about whether that's going to be handled in the right way, and being able to find guidance that they could give to their staff about how to use these tools so as to protect sensitive information, for example. Next slide, please. And lastly, it's worth saying everyone we spoke to felt that collaboration could be improved. They were really open to hearing from all the other organizations that they work with. They want to share knowledge. So that's around approaches to governance, it's use cases, it's about successes and failures that everyone can learn from, even down to direct sharing of technology or automated processes where the technical stack and the team shape and the policy shape allows those things to be exchanged freely. Next slide, please. So I'll pass back over to James now.
Thanks. Thanks, Adam. That was brilliant. Thank you. So, and it leads quite neatly onto the what next. So, what are we going to do with this? You know, these findings, and we believe that the first step to improve this is to create a new community of practice. So we think a new community practice focusing on AI and automation would benefit Wales. We would include all sectors, including local gov, health, arm's length body and Welsh gov. We could share and learn from each other as people experiment further. Having experts join the group would speed up the learning process. The group could also help shape future standards and policies. Positive outcomes from the group could include Welsh public sector feeling more confident in deploying AI and automation in the right places at the right times to improve their public services, consistent standards of deployments of AI and automation across Wales, sharing of successes and failures so that we can all learn from each other. And as Adam said, where digital technology and systems are similar, there may be a possibility of sharing how processes and systems work together to help speed up other deployments. Next slide, please. I've tried to visually show this, why I think the community is so important. So for me, the now, next, later. So the dark blue is the community and the now. I feel that has to come first. And once that community is up and running, we can then use that community to help shape further guidance and shape further governance. So yeah, that's all that diagram's showing there. I hope to get a community started in January, pulling together the people who want to share and learn together and formalizing those expected outcomes, partners who we'd have to help on there, and frequency, etc., around how we would meet. And last slide, please, Elise. So the call to action. If you work in the Welsh public sector and want to be involved, then please get in contact with me. I'll drop my email into the chat. And the very last thing to say is that our full report with full findings and recommendations will be published in January 2024. So that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks very much, all.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Adam and James. So yeah, like we said at the beginning, we're going to be turning off the recording in just a second. And if you have got time, stick around. I know we originally said half an hour, but James, Adam and Matt are all going to be here for half an hour to answer any questions. So I will be ending that recording now. Please post them in the chat and let me know if you'd like to come off mute to ask those as well.